Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the stars through the wide window. The New Horizon had been flying through space for 3 months now, looking for something strange that their computers had found near the edge of human space. Jake was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been exploring space for 20 years and had seen many worlds, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen. The year was 2387, and humans had spread across 17 star systems. Earth was still the center of human life, but the colonies had grown strong and made their own ways of living. Some colonies were built underwater, others were carved into mountains, and a few floated in the clouds of gas giant planets. Each world was different, but they were all human. Jake's ship was looking for energy readings that made no sense. The computer said something big was out there, something that used more power than any human machine. His crew of 40 people had been working hard to find the source, but space was vast and their sensors could only reach so far. Then on a Tuesday morning while Jake was drinking his coffee, everything changed. The ship's alarm started screaming. Lieutenant Ben Parker ran to Jake with his face white with fear. Ben pointed at the main screen and said the words that would haunt Jake forever. More than 200 alien ships had just appeared out of nowhere in the Kepler 442 system. They were massive, each one bigger than any human ship ever built. They moved in perfect formation like a school of deadly fish. The aliens called themselves the Hegemony. They sent a message to every human ship and station in the system. The voice that spoke was cold and hissing like a snake talking. They said they were a group of 12 different alien species that had ruled this part of the galaxy for thousands of years. They had watched humans spread from world to world and decided that humans were dangerous. The message was clear. Humans had grown too fast and taken too much space. The Hegemony said humans must give up all their worlds except 3. Humans must also pay tribute, giving the aliens resources and technology. If humans refused, the Hegemony would destroy every human world and kill every human alive. They gave humanity 72 hours to answer. Jake ordered his ship to race back to Earth as fast as possible. The journey that usually took 2 weeks was completed in 5 days by pushing the engines beyond their limits. When they arrived, Jake saw something that made his heart sink. Admiral Lisa Carter was waiting for them at Terra 1, the great space station that orbited Earth. Lisa was the highest-ranking military officer in human space, a woman with steel in her eyes and iron in her voice. The alien ambassador had already arrived on Terra 1. It was a creature called Kethral, and it looked like a giant lizard that walked on 2 legs. It was 8 feet tall with scales that looked like black metal and eyes like yellow fire. When it spoke, its voice filled the room with the sound of grinding stone. Kethral told Admiral Carter that the Hegemony had crushed 47 different civilizations over the past 1,000 years. The alien explained that the Hegemony had weapons that could crack planets in half. They had shields that could stop nuclear bombs like they were raindrops. They could talk to each other across the galaxy in seconds, while human messages took months to travel between distant worlds. Their technology was so far ahead of human science that fighting them would be like cavemen attacking jets with stone spears. But Kethral had never met humans before. The alien was used to dealing with species that would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. Every other race the Hegemony had encountered chose to live as slaves rather than die as free beings. Kethral expected humans to be the same. It was confident that any thinking species would choose survival over pride. Emergency meetings were held on every human world. On the underwater cities of Poseidon, leaders met in great domed halls surrounded by fish and coral. On the mountain world of New Montana, representatives gathered in caves carved from solid rock. On the cloud cities of Nimbus, politicians floated in chambers high above the storms. From the mining worlds to the farming colonies, from the research stations to the military bases, humans talked and argued and planned. The debates were fierce. Some humans wanted to surrender and live as subjects of the Hegemony. They pointed out that death was final, but slavery might be temporary. Maybe humans could find a way to rebel later when they were stronger. Others argued that giving up their freedom would mean giving up everything that made them human. The arguments went on for hours, then days. Admiral Carter listened to every voice and every argument. She read reports from military experts who said the war would be over in weeks. She studied intelligence files that showed the Hegemony had never lost a single battle in 1,000 years. She looked at the numbers and saw that humanity was outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched in every way that mattered. But when the time came to give the hegemony an answer, Admiral Carter stood before the United Colonies Council with her back straight and her voice clear. She spoke for every human who had ever looked at the stars and wondered what was out there. She spoke for every child who dreamed of exploring distant worlds. She spoke for every person who believed that freedom was worth any price. The final message was sent to the hegemony fleet with Admiral Carter's voice carrying across the void of space. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of all human history. Every war humans had fought for freedom. Every sacrifice made for independence. Every time someone had chosen to stand rather than kneel. All of it was contained in 7 words that would echo through the galaxy forever. The message reached Kethral as it waited aboard its flagship, confident that humans would choose wisely and submit to hegemony rule. The alien expected a message of surrender, perhaps with some requests for mercy or better treatment. Instead, it heard words that no hegemony leader had heard in centuries. Words that carried defiance and challenge and the promise of war. Admiral Carter's voice was steady and strong as she delivered humanity's response. You want war? Then choose it and see what follows. The transmission ended, leaving silence that stretched across light years. In that silence, 2 civilizations prepared for a conflict that would change the galaxy forever. The hegemony had crushed 47 species before, but they had never faced humans. They were about to learn why that mattered. The hegemony struck first at New Canberra, a mining world far from Earth where 6 million humans had built their lives digging metals from the ground. Kethral chose this world because it looked easy to conquer. The planet had only 4 old cruiser ships and a few patrol boats to defend it. The hegemony sent 30 of their best warships, each one armed with weapons that could melt mountains. Commander Pete Walsh was in charge of defending New Canberra. Pete was an old soldier with scars on his face and metal in his bones from the colony wars. He had been fighting for 40 years and knew that his small fleet could not win a normal battle against the aliens. So Pete decided not to fight a normal battle. He gathered his captains and told them something that made their blood run cold. Pete said they would not retreat when their ships were damaged. Instead, they would aim their broken ships at the enemy and ram them. The aliens had never seen anything like this before. When the human cruiser Defiance lost its weapons and engines, its captain did not surrender. He pointed his ship at the nearest alien vessel and pushed the engines until they exploded, turning his ship into a massive bullet. The Defiance smashed into the alien ship and both vessels broke apart in a ball of fire. The aliens could not understand why humans would throw away their lives like this. In their culture, living to fight another day was more important than winning any single battle. But humans thought differently. They would rather die fighting than live as prisoners. The fighting moved to the planet's surface when alien troops landed in the mining tunnels. The humans had spent 50 years digging deep into New Canberra, creating a maze of tunnels that went down for miles. Pete turned these mines into fortresses where humans could hide and attack. The aliens found themselves fighting in dark spaces where their advanced weapons were useless. Mining equipment became weapons of war. Huge drilling machines that could bore through solid rock were used to attack alien vehicles. Industrial explosives that moved mountains were used to collapse tunnels on enemy soldiers. The humans turned their entire world into a weapon, using everything they had built to hurt the invaders. The battle that should have lasted a few hours stretched into days, then weeks. Every tunnel had to be fought for. Every chamber became a battlefield. The aliens won ground slowly and paid for it with blood. Their casualties mounted as human defenders used tactics that made no sense to alien minds. Humans would sacrifice 10 soldiers to kill 1 alien, and they did it with smiles on their faces. Back on Earth, Dr. Nina Blake was studying the first alien prisoners that had been captured. Nina was a scientist who spent her life learning about different forms of life. What she discovered about the hegemony species shocked her. Every single member of the alien alliance had evolved from prey animals. Their ancestors were creatures that ran and hid from predators. The Vorth, who led the hegemony, came from lizard-like creatures that burrowed underground to escape flying hunters. The crystal beings evolved from reef animals that built hard shells to protect themselves. The gas dwellers were descended from creatures that floated away from danger. Every species in the hegemony had the same basic instinct when faced with threats. They tried to get away or hide. This explained why the hegemony had become so powerful. They spent millions of years building better defenses, faster ships, and stronger weapons. because they were always afraid of being eaten. Their technology was designed to keep them safe, not to hunt others. They conquered other species not because they enjoyed fighting, but because controlling others made them feel secure. Humans were different. Nina realized that humans had evolved from hunters who chased their prey across vast distances. Human ancestors did not hide from predators. They became the predators. They learned to work together in groups, to plan attacks, and to never give up once they started hunting something. This hunting instinct was still alive in every human brain. While Nina was making her discoveries, Chief Engineer Rick Sullivan was working on Mars with a team of the best human engineers. Rick was a thin man with quick hands and a mind that never stopped moving. He had been taking apart captured alien technology and trying to understand how it worked. What he found amazed him. The alien technology was incredibly advanced, but it was also rigid. Every piece was designed to work in exactly one way and could not be changed. The aliens built their machines like they built their society, with strict rules that could never be broken. But human brains work differently. Humans could look at a machine designed for one purpose and find 10 other ways to use it. Rick and his team began modifying human ships using alien technology in ways the aliens never intended. They took alien shields designed to protect large stations and put them on small fighters. They used alien communication systems to create weapons that could disrupt enemy computers. They combined human creativity with alien science to build things that should not have been possible. The breakthrough came when Rick discovered how human brains were different from alien minds. Millions of years of hunting had shaped human neural pathways to be incredibly flexible. Humans could see patterns in chaos, solve problems without thinking, and adapt to new situations instantly. This was why humans could use alien technology in ways its creators never imagined. On New Canberra, the battle was entering its third week. Commander Pete Walsh was down to his last 1,000 defenders, but they were still fighting. The aliens had taken most of the planet, but the cost had been terrible. They had lost 15 ships and thousands of soldiers. Kethral could not understand how such a weak world was causing so much damage to his forces. Reports from New Canberra reached other hegemony fleets and spread fear among the alien commanders. They had expected humans to fight like other species, with careful tactics and reasonable losses. Instead, humans fought like wild animals that would rather die than give up. Even worse, the humans seemed to be learning from each battle and getting better at fighting. Other human colonies began preparing for attacks using the lessons learned from New Canberra. They turned their cities into mazes, their factories into weapon shops, and their people into soldiers. Every human world became a fortress that would cost the aliens dearly to capture. The hegemony realized they were not fighting a war of conquest anymore. They were fighting a war of survival against a species that did not know how to quit. Kethral studied the reports from his commanders and felt something his species had not experienced in centuries: fear. The humans were not just resisting, they were adapting faster than the hegemony could respond. For the first time in 1,000 years, the outcome of a war was not certain. The hunters had awakened, and they were learning to hunt in space. 6 months after the war began, the hegemony controlled the main space routes and had conquered 4 human colonies, but their losses were growing every day. Admiral Lisa Carter studied the battle reports in her command center on Terra 1 and saw something that made her smile. The aliens were winning the battles but losing the war. For every human world they took, they lost ships, soldiers, and most importantly, their confidence. Admiral Carter decided it was time to stop playing defense and start hunting. She called it Operation Persistence, and it meant throwing away every rule of space combat that humans had ever learned. Instead of fighting big battles with large fleets, human ships would spread out across the galaxy and attack the hegemony wherever they were weak. Human ships were built for exploring, which meant they could travel alone for months without needing supplies. Captain Jake Morrison now commanded a small fleet of modified human vessels. His ships had been rebuilt using alien technology in ways that made alien engineers weep. The New Horizon could now jump between stars without using the main space lanes. Its weapons were a mix of human creativity and alien power that created destruction the hegemony had never seen before. Jake and his fleet began hunting hegemony supply ships like wolves, hunting deer. The aliens had to send convoys of cargo vessels to feed their massive fleets, and these supply lines stretched across dozens of star systems. Human ships would appear without warning, destroy the cargo ships, and disappear before the hegemony escorts could respond. It was like fighting ghosts. The hegemony had built their empire on rigid control and constant communication between their fleets and central command. Every decision had to be approved by higher authorities. Every battle plan had to follow ancient protocols. But human raiders were cutting the communication lines and destroying the relay stations that held the hegemony together. Without orders from above, alien commanders began to panic. Lieutenant Kelly Rodriguez led a special team of human soldiers who did the impossible. Kelly was a small woman with quick hands and a mind like a computer. She had learned to think like the aliens by studying their behavior patterns. Her team managed to sneak onto a hegemony research station in the Vega system, a fortress that was supposed to be impossible to breach. What Kelly found on that station changed everything humans thought they knew about themselves. The aliens had been studying human DNA taken from prisoners and dead soldiers. They were trying to understand what made humans so different from every other species they had conquered. The research data showed things about human genetics that even human scientists had not discovered. The alien scientist leading the research was a creature called Vex-9. It looked like a living crystal that could think and speak. Vex-9 had spent months analyzing human genetic code and had reached a conclusion that terrified the hegemony leadership. Humans were not just another species that could be conquered and controlled. They were something far more dangerous. According to Vex-9's research, human DNA contained traces of dozens of extinct Earth species. Every successful predator that had ever lived on Earth had contributed something to human evolution. The persistence hunting of early humans, the pack coordination of wolves, the problem-solving abilities of octopi, the endurance of marathon runners, all of it was coded into human genetics. Humans were not just evolved hunters. They were the final result of billions of years of predatory evolution. Every human carried the genetic memory of Earth's most successful killers. This explained why humans could adapt so quickly to new situations, and why they never gave up when hunting something they wanted. It was written in their very cells. Kelly copied all of Vex-9's research and escaped from the station before the aliens knew she had been there. When the data reached Human Command, Dr. Nina Blake studied it with growing excitement. The research explained why humans could use alien technology in ways the aliens never intended. Human brains were designed to find new ways to hunt, and that included hunting with tools they had never seen before. As human raiding fleets penetrated deeper into hegemony space, they began to encounter something unexpected. Not all members of the hegemony were there by choice. Many species had been conquered centuries ago and forced to serve the dominant races. These subject species looked at the humans with hope in their eyes. The Delvins were an aquatic people who had once ruled their own star system. They looked like dolphins that could walk on land and had the most beautiful voices in the galaxy. The hegemony had enslaved them 300 years ago and used them as living computers because of their incredible memory abilities. When human raiders freed a Delvan slave ship, the grateful aliens shared their knowledge willingly. The crystalline Xerions were a silicon-based species who could grow technology instead of building it. They had been forced to create weapons for the hegemony for 2 centuries. When humans offered them freedom in exchange for help, the Xerions began growing new types of ships that combined crystal technology with human design concepts. These hybrid vessels were faster and stronger than anything either species could build alone. Word began to spread through the hegemony's subject species that humans were different from their masters. Humans did not conquer others to make them slaves. They freed slaves and asked for allies instead. This idea was so revolutionary that it started to crack the foundation of hegemony control. Slave species began to whisper about rebellion in languages their masters did not understand. Kethral watched his empire begin to fracture and felt something his species had never experienced before. Desperation. The rigid control that had kept the hegemony stable for centuries was breaking down. Ships were refusing orders, supply lines were failing, and subject species were starting to fight back. The humans had done something no previous enemy had managed. Captain Morrison's fleet struck at a major hegemony mining operation in the Altair system. Instead of just destroying the facility, the humans freed 5,000 alien slaves and gave them ships to escape. These freed slaves spread across the galaxy, carrying stories of human kindness and the promise that the hegemony could be defeated. The war was no longer about humans fighting aliens. It had become about freedom fighting against slavery, about choice fighting against control, about hope fighting against fear. The hegemony had faced rebellions before, but they had always been able to crush them with superior technology and overwhelming force. This time was different because the rebels had humans helping them. Humans did not just fight with weapons and ships. They fought with ideas that spread like viruses through the hegemony's rigid society. The idea that people could choose their own destiny, that strength came from cooperation instead of domination, that the future could be different from the past. These ideas were more dangerous to the hegemony than any weapon, because they could not be stopped by shields or armor. They could only be stopped by changing the entire foundation of alien civilization, and that was something the hegemony could never do. 2 years into the war, Kethral stood in his command chamber and stared at reports that should have been impossible. The hegemony was losing. Human forces had broken through to within 50 light-years of the hegemony capital world, leaving behind a trail of liberated planets and destroyed fleets. Every day brought news of more defeats, more rebellions, and more ships refusing to follow orders. The crystal beings of Zerion had openly joined humanity and were sharing their advanced manufacturing techniques. Their living ships grew like plants but fought like predators, combining alien biology with human tactical thinking. The gas-dwelling morphs of the nebula systems had stopped paying tribute and were using their phase-shifting abilities to help human raiders escape hegemony patrols. Dr. Nina Blake had become humanity's chief diplomatic officer, a job that did not exist before the war began. Nina spent her days talking to alien species that had been enslaved for centuries, learning about their cultures and finding ways to help them fight for freedom. What she discovered was that the hegemony's greatest weakness was not their technology or their military strategy. The real weakness was in their minds. Every member species of the hegemony had been trained to think that conflict was something to avoid at all costs. They fought only when they had overwhelming advantages and retreated the moment things became difficult. When they faced humans who treated war like a complex puzzle to be solved, rather than a disaster to be avoided, the alien alliance began to fall apart. The aquatic Delvins had always been brilliant strategists, but under hegemony rule they were only allowed to plan defensive operations. When humans asked them to help design attacks, the Delvins created battle plans that were works of art. They could predict enemy movements 3 steps ahead and design traps that were invisible until it was too late to escape. Kethral realized that his empire was not just fighting humans anymore. He was fighting an idea that spread from world to world like a disease. The idea that every thinking being deserved to choose their own path through life. This concept was poison to the hegemony system, which required absolute obedience from billions of subjects across thousands of worlds. In desperation, Kethral ordered the construction of a superweapon that could destroy entire star systems. The device was called the Galaxy Killer, and it used the combined technology of all 12 hegemony species to create a beam of energy that could make stars explode. If the hegemony could not control the galaxy, they would destroy it rather than let others have it. But Chief Engineer Rick Sullivan and his team on Mars had been working on their own secret project. Rick had spent 2 years studying how human intuition worked with alien technology, and he had discovered something that changed everything. Humans could not just modify alien machines, they could make those machines think differently. The device Rick built was not a weapon in any traditional sense. It was more like a teacher that could reprogram alien technology to work in new ways. Instead of destroying enemy ships, it would change them from tools of oppression into instruments of liberation. The aliens had never seen anything like it, because their minds could not imagine technology that transformed rather than destroyed. Admiral Lisa Carter knew that the final battle was coming. Intelligence reports showed that Kethral was gathering every remaining hegemony ship around their capital world for one last, desperate fight. Lisa assembled a combined fleet that would have been impossible to imagine when the war began. Human ships flew alongside crystal vessels grown by the Zerions, biological craft piloted by the Delvans, and phase-shifted fighters crewed by the Morphs. The Battle of Hegemony Prime began with the largest space fleet ever assembled jumping into the enemy capital system. Thousands of ships from dozens of species faced off against the remaining hegemony forces. But Admiral Carter had learned from 2 years of fighting aliens. She knew that winning battles was not enough. You had to win minds. Instead of immediately attacking the hegemony fleet, The human alliance did something that had never been done before in galactic warfare. They broadcast the truth to every citizen in the hegemony capital system. Using captured communication arrays and Delvin memory banks, they transmitted the real history of hegemony expansion. For the first time, ordinary hegemony citizens learned about the species their leaders had enslaved, the worlds they had destroyed, and the civilizations they had wiped out to maintain their empire. They saw images of alien children torn from their families, workers dying in hegemony mines, an entire planet stripped bare to feed the imperial war machine. The broadcast also showed what life could be like under human influence. Former slaves working as equals with their liberators, species sharing technology and culture freely, worlds growing and prospering without fear of conquest. The choice was presented clearly to every hegemony citizen. Continue living in a system built on oppression, or join a growing community based on cooperation. The effect was immediate and devastating to hegemony morale. Ships began to surrender without firing a shot. Entire fleets switched sides when their crews realized they had been fighting to preserve a system that treated them as expendable. Even some of the ruling species began to question whether their empire was worth defending. Kethral watched his civilization crumble around him and finally understood what made humans so dangerous. They did not just fight with weapons and strategy. They fought with hope, and hope was more contagious than any plague. Once people began to believe that their lives could be better, no amount of force could make them stop wanting freedom. The Galaxy killer weapon was almost complete when its construction crews learned the truth about their empire. The engineers who had been building the ultimate weapon of destruction simply stopped working. Some sabotaged the project while others walked away to join the human alliance. The superweapon that was supposed to save the hegemony became a symbol of its failure. For the first time in their history, the hegemony's member species were forced to choose between continued subjugation and the uncertain freedom that humanity offered. As their fleets disintegrated and their subject species rebelled, Kethral realized that the humans had accomplished something no previous enemy had ever managed. They had made the hegemony's victims remember what they used to be before they learned to fear. The age of the great alien empire was ending, not with a bang, but with the quiet sound of chains being broken. The war did not end with humanity's victory over the hegemony, because there was no hegemony left to defeat. When given the choice between freedom and security, species that had been subjects for centuries chose to forge their own paths. The galaxy transformed from a rigid hierarchy into a chaotic but vibrant community of independent civilizations that were finally free to discover who they really were. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral, found himself with a job that had never existed before. He was tasked with helping former hegemony worlds establish their own governments and defense forces. Jake discovered that many species had forgotten how to make decisions for themselves after centuries of being told what to do. Learning to be free was harder than learning to fight. The Galactic Council was established not as a governing body, but as a forum where different species could talk to each other without violence. The Great Council Chamber was built in neutral space, far from any star system that could claim ownership. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to discuss trade agreements, territorial disputes, and scientific cooperation. Humans served as mediators because they had proven they could fight without seeking conquest. When the crystal beings of Zerion had a territorial dispute with the gas dwellers of the nebula systems, it was human diplomats who helped them find a solution. When former slave species demanded compensation from their former masters, human judges helped establish fair terms that satisfied both sides. Dr. Nina Blake led scientific exchanges that revolutionized understanding across dozens of species. The aquatic Delvins shared their biotechnology, which allowed other species to grow living ships and buildings. The crystalline Zerions contributed their manufacturing techniques, teaching others how to grow tools and weapons from raw minerals. The gas-dwelling morphs provided insights into stellar engineering that made faster than light, travel safer and more efficient. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not superior technology or military strength. It was the knowledge that no civilization had to choose between survival and growth, between security and freedom. The former hegemony worlds became laboratories of innovation where species that had stagnated for millennia under alien rule began to rediscover their own unique capabilities. Chief Engineer Rick Sullivan established the Prometheus Institute on a dead world that was transformed into a center of learning. Here, humans and aliens worked together to solve challenges that no single species could tackle alone. They created fusion reactors powered by crystalline matrices that could provide clean energy for entire planets. They developed biological computers based on aquatic neural networks that could process information in ways no mechanical device could. New technologies emerged from the intersection of different ways of thinking. Hyperspace drives that bent reality using techniques learned from gas giant dwellers made travel between distant galaxies possible in days rather than centuries. Medical advances that combined human adaptability with alien biology eliminated diseases that had plagued civilizations for thousands of years. The former hegemony capital world became a museum dedicated to the memory of fallen civilizations. Species that had been wiped out by the old empire were remembered with monuments and libraries that preserved their cultures. Visitors could walk through recreated cities, hear the music of extinct peoples, and learn about the diversity that had been lost to conquest and fear. Keth Rowell, the last of the hegemony leaders, spent 5 years in exile on a remote world before requesting an audience with Admiral Lisa Carter. The meeting took place aboard a neutral station, with representatives from a dozen species present as witnesses. The old Vorth warrior looked tired and defeated as he asked the question that had haunted him since his empire fell. Keth Rowell wanted to know why humans had not destroyed the hegemony leadership when they had the chance. Every other species in galactic history had sought revenge against their oppressors. The old alien could not understand why humans had chosen to offer mercy instead of justice. Admiral Carter's response became legendary throughout the galaxy and was quoted in schools across hundreds of worlds. Admiral Carter told Keth Rowell that destruction was easy and any species with enough weapons could destroy their enemies. Building something better than what came before required real strength and wisdom. Humans had not fought the war to prove they were stronger than the hegemony. They had fought to prove that the galaxy could be a place where different species helped each other grow instead of tearing each other down. Trade routes connected dozens of species in ways that had been impossible under hegemony rule. Cultural exchanges produced art and music that no single civilization could have created alone. Scientists made breakthroughs by combining radically different approaches to understanding the universe. The galaxy became a place where diversity was celebrated rather than suppressed. New colonies were established, not through conquest, but through cooperation. When humans discovered a world rich in rare minerals, they shared the location with species that needed those resources. When aliens found planets suitable for human habitation, they invited human settlers to join their communities. The galaxy became larger and more welcoming than anyone had imagined possible. At the center of this new galactic community, humanity continued to do what it had always done best. They adapted to new situations, explored unknown territories, and helped others discover what they were truly capable of achieving. Human ships carried diplomats between feuding worlds, scientists to research stations, and teachers to planets that wanted to learn new ways of living. A century later, the Galactic Council received a transmission from the edge of known space that sounded familiar. Another hegemony had discovered the growing community of free worlds and demanded submission. The message was brief, delivered by an elderly Admiral Morrison from his flagship Endurance, carrying the voice of not just humanity but of hundreds of species that had learned to stand together. This time, the humans were not alone in their response. Crystalline dreadnoughts powered by human engineering flew alongside aquatic bioships crewed by Delvan warriors. More vessels that could phase through solid matter carried fighters from dozens of species, all bearing the insignia of free worlds. The message they sent was the same one that had started the transformation of the galaxy a century before. You want war? Then choose it and see what follows. But this time, what followed was not just the awakening of human persistence and adaptability. What followed was the combined strength of hundreds of species that had learned to work together, to share their knowledge freely, and to stand up for those who could not defend themselves. The age of conquest was ending across the galaxy. The age of cooperation had begun, and those who would choose war would discover what truly followed when an entire galaxy learned to stand together as one.